Another thing is that children's well-being is affected by disparate but interdependent factors. And that's that whole notion that, what happens politically is going to impact kids. What's happening at State Ed Department is going to impact children. When there's a superintendent change, that impacts children. When there's a cut in funding for mental health services, that impacts the classroom. Lastly, we are all part of the solutions. And so the last part of systems thinking says, children's well-being depends on the decisions and actions of adults. And so this takes us to the next part of the presentation. This, again, will go back to your days in either graduate school or undergraduate school. This was my life for the 34 years that I was in education, and I am still in education. Basically, we come to approach schools with a whole child education philosophy. And basically, this draws upon the thinking of Maslow, where you have children's physical development, playing a part in children's academic success, the social emotional piece, which Kerron will talk about more in depth. If you have maybe 5% of your population not responding to your tier 1, you need to take other factors into consideration. And so Kerron will talk to you more about that. All of these things impact upon children's academic success. And then at the very top is the premise that for children to succeed academically, for them to be good decision makers, to be ethical and competent in all of those areas, all of these other pieces have to be in place. Does it mean that all kids who may not be physically, at their best in terms of well-being are going to fail? No. But it means that to realize human potential, to be the best that you can be, requires that you really look at all of these aspects of child development. So, what I'd like to do now is to ask you, how many of you are here as teens, are part of a team? All right, so what do you think would be the best way to do it?
You are part, right. So why don't we just take a minute
Just do a partner.
Yeah, to a partnership.
This is something that's done by Andress a lot when they do their training. I'm going to ask you to envision a school that attends to all of these developmental aspects of children's growth. And for about 5 minutes, what would that school look like? What services, programs, and practices would you envision to take place in a school that approaches school change, school reform, in terms of a whole child education approach? What would it look like? I'm going to write down 3 words, just so you can think a little bit in terms of organization, programs, practices, services. So if you can do that, can we do a time check?
We're good. We're 12:03. So.
Yeah. Let's go back at their table.
Yeah, at your table.
Just do what we would call partnership. Thank you. I'm not sure whether we will be able to get to every pair to share out, but we would like to get some things recorded because we want to get a bigger picture of just specific programs to support student success. We want to get a bigger picture of what it takes to have a whole child education approach to teaching, to learning, to school organization. So let's get some share-outs. Any comments? Yes, Harry.
When you talk about regarding prenatal and postnatal education of the parent.
Okay, let's capture that and in almost in a way extend that thinking to terms that I've come to learn over my time as being a community school principal, really offering collateral support for families. And that's a critical piece. So we're going to mention the prenatal piece, but in thinking broader, you're really thinking about some collateral services for families. Yes, anything else?
We talked about the climate and culture of the school has to be welcoming. You have to know the culture of your community so that when people come into the school, what do they need to see on those walls? What do they need to see and hear your secretary say? What do they need the teachers to be saying that makes them feel that they're going to be safe there, that they're going to feel supported there, et cetera. So there's the nurse. How does the nurse work with the families? Is she available? What does she do? What about your health that you have? Are the kids eating healthy? Do you make sure the cafeteria food is healthy?
So there's two things that you mentioned. One of them is really attending to children's nutritional well-being, their nutritional health, because it makes that connection to their academic success. How many of you in buildings know what it's like to have kids come to school with their stomachs making funny noises? Okay? So, absolutely. Then you said another thing. You talked about the responses of everybody in that building to children, including how they come in and are greeted by the secretary, and as well as others. In the world of community schooling, we call that relational engagement. So it's a relational engagement, a positive relational engagement that extends to all stakeholders in the school community. And so that's very powerful. And we heard some of Jamal's efforts to do that kind of work in his building. And I'm working now with Jonathan, and there's a real emphasis on doing that as well in Longfellow Middle School.
I think it has to be district-wide. You know, the jewel in a sea of mess is not, you know, it's not productive. It doesn't build the capacity. I think you have to build the capacity district-wide.
So that's a
and this is coming from the superintendent, so she knows.
Oh, you know, that's
what I'm saying. That.
So let's talk about really building capacity and advocates at all levels.
I think that kids, especially in bigger districts, are very mobile within those districts sometimes. They can go to 2 or 3 different schools in a year sometimes, or certainly in 2 years. The schools need to be consistent in what they're going to experience when they walk in.
We were in a little district, Port Chester, and you're absolutely right. I gotta tell you, Port Chester is a small district with about 450 kids in each building, except for one which is larger because it has a bigger catch-all. But they moved all the time. So absolutely. And having the same, you know, building capacity across all of the buildings and sharing a common language and approach is important. Anything else in districts that have a whole school approach or a whole child approach?
Part of what we talked about is making sure that you have people with formal roles and responsibilities for the social and emotional development of both young people and adults.
So you're talking about building an infrastructure, and I'm trying to kind of cast it in an organizational way, an infrastructure that not only attends to some of the academic components, but will really take on some of the social, emotional aspects of children's development. I'd stretch that even further because a lot of our work with JoAnne, myself, and Andres is empowering the teachers to take on that responsibility. We're going to be talking about that as well. Let's just field one more comment or question related to the whole school approach, whole child, and actually it's really whole child, whole school, reflecting your comment. Yes.
Building linkages within the community for any resources that are difficult to access, after school programming, physical health concerns that can take place right within the school.
Right. You know, one of the things that made us a community school was a vision that our Congresswoman, Nita Lowey, had, coupled with Cora Greenberg and coupled with the late Joy Dreyfus, where that vision was to turn buildings, and by the way, at 3 o'clock I was ushered out of the building by my custodian, to really make them the hubs of the community so that they could be accessed by a host of organizations. And at the conclusion of my tenure, that's exactly what happened, and I'm happy to say that still goes on today in the building.
So we have been working, we feel very fortunate to be working with Andrews. It's a very, very exciting project, I should say. It's in 5 elementary schools, 5 Title I, well, no, you're 4 Title I elementary schools and 1 middle school. We're so happy that we have the principals here. And Kerron's going to be talking about how Andrus is working and reaching out into the communities, into public schools. And
if I could just say one other thing before Kerron begins.
And I will take
and
over the slide.
One of the things that resonated with me was another comment that was made by Eddie Fergus, which was, we gotta rethink how we feel about fixing things. You know, we've got to rethink our concepts about fixing kids, about fixing families, about fixing communities. And so the work that I've recently been involved with Andrus is exciting for me and for JoAnne because it takes a different perspective about what needs to be done to support children and students and youth.
So good morning again, everyone. I have to let you know that I'm a social worker, so I tend to be a little anecdotal. So just go on a journey with me just for a few minutes and we'll get to the point. So I've been working at Andrus for almost 3 years now, and prior to that, I was the director of child welfare in Westchester County for 6 years for the city of Yonkers. And before that, I had worked for New York City's Administration for Children's Services / CWA in child welfare for 16.5 years. So I bring to Andrus a whole lot of thoughts about how to fix things, how to protect children. But the one thing that really stood out for me was this whole idea about how to do things differently. And I think that the sanctuary model has afforded me this real opportunity to take a look at systems in a different way. So when we begin to talk about how to change our perspectives, I can tell you one of the things that I did and really drew me to Andrus was this whole idea of making this paradigm shift in my mind. So for 20 plus years, I hate saying it now, right? I've been thinking about what's wrong in a family, what's wrong in a situation. A lot of time, a lot of focus, a lot of energy on what's wrong. So the sanctuary model allows us to make this shift from what's wrong with you, if you will, to what's happening. So often when we started working with schools and have gone in, and I have to brag just a little bit. So yes, we are in 4 schools in Mount Vernon, and I'm so glad to have one of the principals here with us. And later on, I'll call on you and ask you, of course, to talk about the wonderful work. But we're also in 7 schools between Yonkers, an additional 7 schools between Yonkers and Peekskill. So altogether, we're in 12 schools in Westchester County. And what's so exciting for us is when we come in and we meet with extremely bright and articulate professionals, educators, and they tell me all about the work to educate children. And we begin to talk, and a lot of the conversation started, and I have to tell you, when we started this journey in a serious way in a public-private partnership a couple of years ago, a lot of the conversation was around what's wrong with the children, what's wrong in our schools, what's wrong with the parents, what's wrong with our district. So a lot of that conversation is what's wrong, right? So part of the journey in being a good steward and saleswoman that I am is to then have the conversation about what's happened. So you help people unpack, very articulate educators unpack their journey, because that's going to be important to getting to how we do the sanctuary model, how we enact it. So as we unpack the journey, we begin to hear what's happening. And for me, this is critical because as a teacher begins to tell me, as a principal begins to tell me their story and the history and the story of the school, we then begin to realize how we have to unfold it for what's happened with children, what's happened for parents. So all of these things have such critical points of importance in how the relationships work and how we work together that it couldn't be more exciting for me to be an Andress because we really spend a lot of time on that. And when we do something called the ACEs, how many of you by show of hands know what the ACE study is? That's so good because a couple of years ago, a lot of people had not heard of adverse childhood experiences and would look at you like, what? So rather than take you through the entire thing, what we have found about adverse childhood experiences, because we do a lot of work and talk a lot about trauma, but I think that the adverse childhood experiences study and doing that questionnaire kind of equalizes the playing field a little bit for everyone. Because invariably, most people will have experienced at least one adversity in childhood. And if they haven't, that's really wonderful because they've had superlatively protected lives. And then we have to talk about what that looked like, and so what happened there in order to make them have such a great childhood. But most people will invariably have had at least one traumatic experience or one adverse experience. And that kind of helps you to figure out how to relate to children and families differently, because then you begin to think, well, this happened to me, so something has happened to get people to where they are now, the way they're functioning in the classrooms, the way they're presenting at the schools. The other piece that's interesting for me is when I go into the schools, a lot of times I look for messaging. So for several of the schools that I visited in Westchester County, there were signs. Parents not past this point. Parents not welcome. And so then we had that conversation. Well, what's that message? So what happens just in that moment for a parent or a teacher or a child when they see those kinds of messages? So when we begin to talk about what's happened and we begin to try to shift our thinking, we really begin to understand that the problems that we are having in schools or the problems that children are exhibiting are not limited to just behavior. A lot of times I think that they're reenacted or reinforced by messages that we may not even be consciously about. So we talk a lot to teachers and to principals, and we also do, and it was great to hear this morning when you talked about the accountability for everybody. So the security guard, the secretaries at the front desk, the food service staff, the teachers, the paraprofessionals, everyone being on message. So for us, everyone has to have information about trauma. Everyone we train will do the ACE questionnaire and begin to think about their own childhood, their own histories, what they bring to the relationship, and everyone begins to have this conversation around emotion, social emotional wellness, and really looking at feelings and figuring out how feelings do really impact the work that you're doing, the ways in which people interact with one another, and the ways that we interact with children and their parents. So we talk about also shaping school climate and culture, and that's huge. So I wouldn't tell you that I knew a lot about PBIS, but when you talked about it today, I got really intrigued. And this whole idea, like that tier 1?
Yes.
Okay, and so that's really where a lot of the work happens. So we do a lot of wonderful things that I'll tell you about a little bit later in the presentation that really help teachers and children get grounded from whether you do it at the start of the day or throughout the course of the day. It's a check-in, and it really sets the tone. So we spent a lot of time talking about and helping to train on that experience from walking through the front door. But also, and what I found profound, was working with a school that said, well, one of the goals we'll have based on this training and this new understanding is every child will be greeted when they come in the room. So, you know, I think, like, I was really shocked, but I didn't want to let it show. And the idea that children would actually get through a school door without being greeted. And it can happen because we're all very busy people, and I'm sure everyone at the front door has got the best of intentions trying to herd these busy cats into their classrooms or into the lunchroom or wherever they have to go. But I can't imagine my child walking through the front door and someone not saying good morning. I've heard teachers say that one of the other things that they're doing now is we'll remember every child's name. So these are really, they seem like small things. We talked earlier about making complicated problems have complicated solutions, I think you said. But sometimes complicated solutions are rather simplistic, right? So remembering every child's name and imagining how important that is. So I think of myself. So here's my anecdote. My name is Kerron, right? So it's spelled weird. Okay. I had Jamaican Panamanian mother, and that's what worked for her. I was supposed to be Carrie, because I was supposed to be a boy, right? So I have 3 other sisters, and we all have these names that should have been, because there was Patricia was supposed to be Patrick, Marie was supposed to be Maurice, I'm supposed to be Carrie, and Christine was supposed to be Christopher, and we're all girls, and look at here we are. So when I think about shaping a school climate and how important that is, I think about my childhood. So I think about my first day at Head Start and how excited I was to be there. And how I get in and I'm sitting down and my teacher, because I never forgot her name, is Atanasio, said, Kerron. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, I'm Karen. So she tells me, no, you're Kerron. So like that is a decision-making moment. So at home, I'm allowed to be myself. So I'd say I'm rather bold. And I grew up that way, thinking that, well, I can engage this adult because I think she's wrong, I think I'm right, we should have this conversation. So I said, no, my name is Karen. My mother calls me Karen. I'm going to need you to call me Karen. So I hear it's spelled wrong, and she's convincing me that it's spelled wrong. We have this conversation. So then we have what I would refer to as a standoff. And many of the professional educators in this room would probably think of it as a standoff as well, right?
I think you would be suspended now.
Yeah, pretty much. So she decides that she's going to call me Kerron, and I've decided that that is not my name. And I think it was like a real big decision on my part at the time. So talk about how we develop climate, culture, and a feeling of respect. For the rest of the day, when I did raise my hand, because I'm one of those who I think I always know the answer, and at home I'm allowed to give it, they actually encourage it at home. She's bright, she's smart, that's my girl. Listen to her, she's good. She's going to be good. That's how it goes at home, so I'm expecting the same situation when I go to school, but you're going to call me Karen. So she decided I'm Kerron, and I'm decided I'm not answering. So my mom comes to get me, and I'm excited, but I really do have an attitude too, because this woman has called me Kerron all day long, and it has really been on my last nerve. So I'm waiting to see how my mom is going to handle it. So Ms. Atanasio was like, well, you know, she's bright, she knew her letters, she knew this, she knew that, but she doesn't know her name. So my mother's like, I don't think that that's possible. So she's like, oh, Kerron. So she's like, well, that's not her name. Her name is Karen. So I'm looking at my mother, because right there and then we're going to figure out how this works. Now, had she acquiesced, like a lot of our parents will, right? A lot of our parents do not have the agency to look at this educated professional in the school and say, and really speak up for themselves and say, no, I named my daughter Karen, and you may not like how it's spelled, that is what her name is, and that's what I'd like to be called. A lot of our parents will acquiesce and say, well, call her Kerron, or well, it's okay, or smooth it over and be done with it. But that's a problem. And then we have the other kind of parent who get mad and tell you off, because you're not saying their kid's name right and you're not showing respect. But thank God I had the kind of mother that I had, and she was patient, gentle, but she had her own sense of efficacy and decided, no, you're going to call my kid Karen, because that's what I call her and that's what I appreciate. So I am blessed to have had a mom like that, but a lot of parents don't have that ability, and that plays itself out in the school. And so for our model, that might be the tipping point for a disturbance that would continue throughout the lifetime. And that was, I don't want to tell you how many years ago, because I'm not into that, but I can still remember the day. I can still remember the incident. I can still remember the teacher's name. I can remember what I had on.
I was about to say, you know, you had on probably too.
Yeah, I remember what I had on. I remember looking right in my mother's face. I looked right up at her at that moment, because I felt disrespected all day long, and I felt angry about it. Now, I don't know that I had the language to say, oh, I felt disrespected. Kids do it now. They'll tell you that, oh, she dissed me. Okay, that teacher dissed me. They may not tell you directly that first day you dissed them, but you figure out something went wrong, because now you've got a kid who's turned off, who has an attitude. You have a parent who may not have known how to address you in a way that you would understand. So I think about my work in child welfare. One of the first things that we did, I started when I came from ACS, and there had just been these horrible cases of child abuse because of a child who missed a lot of school. So I started educational neglect units. I worked with Carl Bertrand and a number of other people to do Yonkers truancy reduction project. And we began to look at action groups, right? But one of the things I understood from that and having that experience is that we needed to help parents who weren't sending their children to school to figure out a way to speak to a teacher on a level that they could manage. So a lot of our families were Latino families, and they didn't speak a lot of English. And so they didn't speak what I've come to coin now. They didn't speak this white, middle-class American jargon. So they were having a difficult time connecting and forming a relationship with their teacher. So we came up with, and it was a caseworker of mine who I'll love forever. She's in Georgia now. Her name was Debbie Bonilla, and we called it the Debbie letter. And this letter has gone out throughout Westchester County, and everybody uses the Debbie letter now, because this letter is so white middle class, it's just beautiful. Dear teacher, I want you to know that I intend to be a partner with you this year in my child's education. If you have any concerns, please, I want you to reach me. I want you to call me at this number. I am available to you. I'm looking forward to being your partner.
And be quiet. And share. So who would like to tell us how they would address teaching and learning using the lens of trauma and adversity? What would it have to look like in your schools in order to address those issues? Come on, work with me here. You know, you all teachers. You don't like it when people don't respond to you. Your kids are just sitting there, putting their heads down. I can see all of you. So put your head down. I can still see. Yes.
I just think of the biggest issue is communication. Like, that teacher didn't know what she was doing to you, and often we're teachers. We were talking about it, how you just could be totally in the dark about something going on in your student's life, stress or whatever, and you're trying to do your thing, and they can't even try to learn because of something there in the way that does have to be dealt with some way. And you could be aware.
Communication sensitivity.
Yep.
That's what we talked about. We talked about having multiple ways to deal with the kids because they're all different. Not treating every single kid the same way, not approaching every situation the same way. You know, knowing at least the kid in front of you has, you know, a positive way to be dealt with.
Okay. Yep.
I'm going to muddle a little bit what was said this morning. It's not
Yes,
going to be
we have our experts.
it's not going to come close to being as eloquent as you were. However, when you were speaking about, a child has an idea of who they are, and yet then they also gain this learned understanding of how they are seen. So I'm thinking about Black or Hispanic children coming to schools that are often staffed by white teachers, and how children learn about them, how they are seen by often white staff, and not that it's everything towards that, but just we say how much we love the kids, but there's also getting the message across that you simply like the kids, and that's it's very easy to love beautiful children, but it's also very easy, well, I think so, it's also very easy not to let them know how much you like them. And that simple good morning I think goes a long way to, like, this is how I view you, and shape, and you know, that's a lot of, I don't even have a big answer to your question. We were just saying sometimes it's just,
and to acknowledge and value.
Like that's the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth thing.
And those of you who are teachers, just a quick story, because sometimes we are very well intentioned and we don't really kind of think about those communication strategies. We had a way of opening our building every day. The kids walked in on their own, pretty orderly, not a problem, and teachers would greet them at the door. And then all of a sudden, people got worried when it was flu season. And when all kinds of colds and viral things were really coming around. One day, I'm walking through the halls, and the teachers are not welcoming the kids anymore. Guess what's in their hands? Worse than that, germ killer. So, you know, we had to have a comfortable conversation about welcoming is important. I understand the issue of, you know, germs. So you can put the bottle in the room, greet them at the door, and then they can proceed to their seats. And so that's just an example of, sometimes we do the simplest things with not even a negative intention, but the consequences can say the wrong messaging to the children. So I just want to share that with you, because it's a simple thing that sometimes we don't look to ourselves. It's very easy for us to kind of not examine our own lens. Valencia?
I think the lens that we do look at kids through is really, as it is for all of us, is through our culture. And we do have white teachers who don't have the acculturation, who don't have experience of understanding the culture that they're trying to, that the students come from, that they're trying to teach. And what they do know is very filled with stereotypes. Yeah. And so they're operating from a lens that I think is out of focus, because it's operating from stereotypes. And stereotypes for anybody aren't about who that person is. So I think you have to really be very, very delicate in how you work with teachers around that. And you've also got to think about this issue of what trauma they may have experienced. But then the other problem is, once you talk about trauma, then, oh, you poor child. And you have to help teachers work through how we handle that. So there's a lot to it about, I think, trying to be as caring as you can while holding everybody to high standards. Understanding the fact that, whether you want to call it cultural competence, cultural sensitivity, whatever, we don't know enough about one another in America. Right. And that's really bad. We have to quit believing that we all know each other and we all have integration. We don't. We do not. And those places where we are integrated, we need to really push those. Our teachers are not going to change if it's not part of their culture. And we have to make it part of their culture. We have to make it okay for teachers to come and visit kids in their communities where they live. I've had white teachers say to me, I love the children, I love what we're doing, but my family doesn't want me to keep teaching these children. I get a lot of pressure from my husband, my uncle, my brother, my grandfather, my mother, not to teach these children. How do we help teachers who are experiencing that within their own families deal with that? And you know, I've been doing this 41 years. And I've had teachers in the South tell me that, in the Midwest, and in the Northeast. I don't want anybody to think it's just something that happens in one part of the country. We don't understand sometimes what black teachers go through when they're in white institutions, and we don't understand what white teachers go through when they're in predominantly black schools, because they are not treated with respect that they should have for teaching the children that they teach. So the trauma that they experience in teaching our children is something that we don't deal with. And the trauma that black teachers deal with in teaching their own is something we don't deal with. The stereotype of negative energy around teaching children of color and teaching children of poverty is significant for those teachers who have made that their life mission to teach.
And you said a couple of things. One was that, you know, you have to overcome the stereotypes that we all have, and you have to maintain the high standards. One of the things that I have found in working with Andrews this past year and a half is that one of the things that it does really well, and in my experience has not been a part of most professional development, where you come in and I always say you spray them with the training and pray they use it. They really do a lot of introspective work. You know your triggers. Learn to know your triggers. Learn why you have these triggers. And then think about ways to rechannel that negative energy so that you can continue to meet the needs of the child. And that has been a really, really enlightening piece for me, and I think Kerron wants to talk more about it. But as someone who was a building principal and a former teacher, I had never had that conversation, you know, where, yes, I always encourage people to take care of themselves, but they make it a part of what you do in schools because they recognize the parallel process of stress. So I'm really agreeing with you and saying that we need to do more of that. We need to do more self-reflection among our teachers and even among ourselves so that we understand that we are a product of our experiences and we are shaped by them. And they shape how we interact with kids.
I agree, but I also think that we need to have the conversation. So what I've also encouraged, and so we've done it at Andrus, and it's been pretty profound. We continue to do it in Westchester County right now. We do the Undoing Racism workshop from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. And it really changes the dialogue. And, okay, Danny, I like that you share.
Yeah.
So, no, really.
It's life-changing.
Talk about it.
I think it's life-changing because I'm a social worker, I work for Andrus, and as much as you get education about cultural competency and keeping other people's perspectives in mind, and I could spout it. It wasn't until I went through that training where I realized how ingrained it is, and the role of institutional racism in institutions was just, I mean, I see it everywhere, and it impacts my work on a daily basis, and it was actually life-changing.
And I recommend it. It's to help you have a conversation that normally you're not able to have because we feel a lot of times, not everyone, but people feel so polarized on either side of the conversation that you can't have it. So it's an exploration. And really you unpack systems. I'm going to give you a chance. You unpack the system. You unpack your role within the system. A lot of times we come to find that most of us are gatekeepers, what that looks like. But when we're not able to have genuine conversations about race, class, and culture and what that means for our work, what that means for us as individuals in society, and certainly what that means for the children and families that we're working with, we really never scratch the surface of the work that we need to do. But you had your hand there.
You think I'd just like to say, as a member of the African American Advanced Group Board, one of the topics that we try to deal with, and as an educator, is that in Westchester County, it's very difficult for a black teacher to work in certain communities. It doesn't matter how qualified you are, and they always come with, are you qualified now? It's very difficult. I work with pre-skilled schools trying to get more diversity, and it's very difficult because when you walk into the school, and some schools here in Westchester are run by the parents. They stay in the school in those more affluent communities, they run the schools. When you enter over there, they meet you at the door, even if you come dressed as a professional, and ask you, can we help you? And when you tell them you come from an interview, just had this happen to a friend of mine who went for a superintendent of schools, they were all surprised. So I think it's very important.
To go back to the original question about social emotional learning in the classroom and how do you make it happen for teachers, from my perspective as a building leader, it begins with setting the tone for the adults. The students get it quickly, and many of them have it in their hearts to already do the right thing. But a lot of the times when students don't conduct themselves the way we want them to, it's usually because of the way an adult treated them, either in their home or in the school. So when we talk about disproportionality and suspension, it's a social justice issue. But we can't tackle social justice unless we're willing to have a conversation about how we feel about the issue. And I'm glad that the point about the Undoing Racism workshop came up, because I got to sit there and feel uncomfortable with a room full of people who felt uncomfortable, and then we were able to have the conversation. And it's through that conversation where good decisions can be made about what happens to young people in the school. And I could say 10,000 things about race and its impact, but I think the big point I would like to make is that we talk about suspensions and encouraging that social emotional learning. The most important aspect from my position is the ability to have open communication. The student needs to be able to say, this is what I did, this is why I did it, this is how I need to get out of it. And without that open communication, it becomes punitive versus consequential. And I think if we talk about suspensions as being consequential versus being punitive, it completely changes the dialogue about why and how we suspend students.
Seems to me teachers have to be trained better in dealing with kids, homeless kids, kids in foster homes, kids in extreme poverty. don't know if there's enough of that.
Well, I think we're taking some of the Andrews work into schools, and that's really so exciting. I mean, I'm an educator, and I consider myself having lots of resources and experiences, and it was a real eye-opener for me after practicing for so many years to see, wow, this is a lens, right, Jonathan, that I never even thought about using before. So it's been eye-opening for us as educators. Yeah.
Maybe because I've been doing this for 23 years, I also think kids need a place where there's a no judgment zone. They find that teacher that they can talk to, and that teacher allows them to say what they want, even if it's about another teacher. And you know,
they feel safe.
They feel safe. I think we don't have enough of that, and I don't think we have enough teachers who allow students. You know, I don't want to hear it if you're going to talk about another staff member when this kid is really trying to tell you something's wrong. So I think that needs to be, we need to train teachers to be more like that and be...
Well, that goes back to the previous slide with the whole child's education. So you're not only thinking about their physical development and their needs, but you're thinking about that social emotional. Unless you feel socially and emotionally safe, psychologically safe, you're never going to get to the higher order thinking that all of us as teachers want to impact so we can have better test scores. You'll never get there if kids don't feel safe and if their emotions are not taken into account. So let me get on to the next part of the presentation because we just changed it up a little bit and we have something exciting that we're going to do. But we use a four-pronged approach when we're really thinking about the commitment to teaching and learning. So this is what it looks like for us. Using that trauma-informed lens, and that's one of the things that we've been doing with Sanctuary. So we're doing classroom practices where we really have teachers looking at trauma, how trauma has impacted them, and how trauma is impacting their interactions with the students. We're looking at developmentally appropriate practices. Think about that. As teachers now with Common Core, I think the developmentally appropriate practices have gone out the window. So we really look, and I see people shaking their heads. Yeah, I'm going to the choir here. We really look at, is that what, should a kindergartner be sitting for an hour trying to open up a math workbook? I saw that in one of the schools I was working in, not these schools, and one of filling in a math worksheet when they don't even know how to hold the book. So they're going like this. Is that developmentally appropriate? And as I said earlier, it's based on relational engagement. This goes back to the statement that was just made about teachers being that open space for children to talk. It's all about relationships. All of the neuroscience work talks about relational engagement. Unless you feel safe and you can talk to others, you're not going to have a positive school climate. And certainly about having it family and community centered. So you strengthen the family, you strengthen the school, you strengthen the community. It's just a byproduct. So that's really the four-pronged approach that we use when we are in schools. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those sanctuary tools that come under the trauma-informed lens.
So I want to make sure I really do my job. So I want to actually give you some of the points that we use in the sanctuary model, not just my anecdotes. I'll check my notes. And Danny's going to keep me honest, but she'll let the group know if I don't give you the salient details for the sanctuary model. Okay, so we have 7 commitments. And it's how we help school climate to change, how we help schools organize, and how we help schools to develop what we call safe communities. So our first commitment is a commitment to nonviolence. And so we work with schools around that, and by nonviolence, I'm not just talking about the physical. I'm talking about psychological, social, and moral. So gossiping is just as harmful as punching someone sometimes. Shunning, not speaking to, not looking at, not addressing, ignoring, can be just as violent and just as harmful to a child, another adult, another colleague, and to a parent as anything else that we can do. So we help schools to enter into these commitments and agreements and help them to be values for how the school operates. And so it's rules, if you will, commitments that we offer to the schools, and to then expect share these commitments with the children, with one another, and how they interact with parents ever after. We also help schools to commit to emotional intelligence. And that's a lot of what we talked about here earlier. A sensitivity towards emotion and feeling, and towards problem solving and behavior. Everyone's looking at it, everyone's attending to it, so if there's a child in the school named Kerron and he calling her Kerron, you'll pay attention to that look on her face, or that little boy whose name might sound a little bit different than someone else's. If you want to be phonetically correct with each and every word, it's going to make that child feel bad. And so pay attention to that child's face. So we talk about things like that, okay? So we also do social learning, and that is collaborative thinking and problem solving. So everyone's involved. So if there is a problem in the classroom, there's an opportunity for the teacher to engage with the kids to figure out, how can this look differently? What's something that we can do differently? And try to reach agreement with the children that this is something we'll try to involve them in problem solving. Same with parents, same with one another. And so these are commitments that we're asking everyone to make on every level with one another and with the children that they're serving. We also look at democracy as a commitment. Now this one is interesting, right? So I can tell you how it plays out at Andrews. And so Danny's smiling. So the way it plays out at Andrews is you said that we make a commitment to democracy. So that means usually I've set the dress code for the mental health division. And I'll have staff say, but we practice democracy here at Andrews County. So that means that if I don't like that you don't want me to wear flip-flops and a halter top, I cannot wear flip-flops. I can wear my flip-flops and my halter top because we practice democracy. So when I say democracy, I mean participation in a process, right? So we're in the meeting, we're having it together. You can actually tell me, I wish that wasn't the rule. I wish there was some other way you would look at that. Can we think about that? And then if I say to you, well, we have thought about it, and for safety reasons and for an overall professional look, that's not what we're going to do. It means that there's an expectation on both our parts that we were both heard, that I didn't dismiss you, but at the same time I didn't agree. We're going to agree that we're going to walk away in disagreement, but we're actually going to follow this rule because that's pretty much the way it is. But oftentimes the way it plays itself out is, well, there's supposed to be democracy here, and they made this rule, and I don't agree. So democracy means that you'll get a chance to be heard. There'll be some conversation, sometimes. Other times it can mean that there's actually an opportunity to influence this decision because there's other information or additional things that you'll bring to the table that maybe we can agree on differently. But if this is the absolute, we can walk away respecting one another, and there may not be this need to have a grudge, or every time you see me, you're like really, really annoyed because you really had this really hot halter you really needed to wear and bring to the game. So we've had these conversations and they play themselves out, and it's on every level, right? So democracy might mean that with your child at dinner, you like for them to eat the plate full and eat all the vegetables, but this one night, they can have the dessert first. That sometimes is how you can have democracy and have that work out as well, just as an aside. We also talk about open communication, and that's huge. So, open communication is so critical because if you are making changes in the school, and I'm trying to remember which speaker said it this morning. Someone said that decisions and policies people ought to know about. So if the superintendent has a policy about how the school is going to function or the new definition for disrespect, the principal should know that so that they can carry it out in the school as opposed to, oh, that's what we're doing now? So open communication kind of ensures that we make sure that everyone's informed so that there are not these surprises and these gaps in the conversation. And also in open communication, sometimes you forget to loop someone in, and they can say to you, hey, you didn't loop me in. And there's your opening to say, oh, you know what? You're right. I should, and I will moving forward, but here's what we want to do. And so we really try to work with schools to make sure that that is operating. And in the classroom, children are people. So if there's a change, we're going to do something different today. So now they know, as opposed to you doing different. Kids are used to this other thing, and they're like, but you didn't do what you were supposed to, or you said you were going to do. There's that conversation, and there's that opportunity. And we also talk about growth and change. So we always are going to look for opportunities to grow and to be future-oriented, to look at how things could be, and really to process loss, because that happens from time to time, process change, and then look for ways to move forward. Now, we do something that's totally, totally cool, I promise you. But it takes some practice. And oftentimes I get from teachers how it's difficult and it takes too much time. And so I think part of the challenge is people get scared when they think they have to talk about emotions. So for social workers, we dig in, okay, great. We like to process, we want to talk about how we feel, we want to know how you feel. And for educators, sometimes that's for like, no, you know, what is it? Because I always say wrong, is it pedagogy?
Pedagogy.
Pedagogy. That's the focus, right? When I'm here to teach you, and this is, so how you feel.
It's not part of the picture.
It's not part of the picture.
You gotta learn the content.
But if we're creating a different school climate, and we're really going to be responsible socially to one another, and we want good outcomes, we have to connect. So there has to be this opportunity for connection. So we do something called community meeting. In a community meeting, we are really looking at connection. We're helping, and we do this, I have to tell you, at every level. So the latest challenge for Andrews has been to do it with the board. Because our board is like, what? So, but more and more since we've been introducing them all and talking about it, more and more they're becoming receptive. Because it is about feeling, and people get scared of that stuff, but you have to. So what's been exciting is, Danny, I'm calling on you a lot today.
Yes.
It's okay.
It's good. You recently taught kindergarten how to do this, right? What was that experience like?
Oh, it was extremely rewarding. We broke it down, though. You needed to kind of preload and teach them some feelings because the kids' answers are always going to be good. They're feeling good. Or they'll just copy the kid next to how they're feeling, so it takes some practice. But it was wonderful because they actually would do a better job once you preloaded than some of the staff have had feeling sharing it.
So the first question is the community meeting.
Are we actually going to do one?
We are.
Oh, good.
Right
good,
now.
good.
This is where the fun stuff, right? Okay.
It's supposed to be an interactive
It
session,
is.
so we're going to make it interactive.
So let me tell you the questions. So the first question is, how are you feeling? So good is not a feeling. So we need more expression in that. So when we do it with children,
I guess I'm going to write it down.
thank you. When we do it with children, we actually have little emotions with faces that they can point to and get connected. Because what you want to do is really to train children and adults to really connect to how they're feeling, right? So if you can name it, you might have the possibility of changing it if you need to and regulating yourself. But if you're not even in touch with how you're feeling, and if you're feeling crunchy and kind of jacked up, people kind of need to know that at the start of the day or throughout the course of the day so they figure out, well, this is what I'm going to do with Cynthia today. I'm going to like leave her alone. She's not in the mood. Or she might be feeling really engaged and overjoyed. And so when I first started at Andrews, I have to tell you that this did not come easy to me because in my culture and in the household that I grew up in, how you feel, what's going on in your house, and what's going on for you is kind of yours. What happens at home stays at home. So I'm not from this culture where you just put it all out there. And then I went to social work school and they say, no, put it all out there. So of course I want my clients to put it all out there. And I say very stoic and go, okay, so what does that mean? You know. So now, that's our first question is, how are you feeling? And then, so we do this in meetings. So this happens at our executive staff meeting and it happens at our board meeting. So imagine the chairman of my board, Jack McLaughlin, you know him? So imagine Jack going, feeling pretty terrific today. So that was like huge. I was like, yeah, we get him on board, we get the rest of them going. So the next question is, what is your goal? So we like to be a little more specific. So what's your goal for this meeting? What's your goal for today? Oh, look what Danny has.
We made these for our school.
Oh, that's great. That's what we need.
Okay.
This is our little prompt.
And then the third question is, and so this is how you create community and connection. Who will you ask for help? Now that's huge, right? Because CEOs don't need no help, right? Vice presidents don't need any help. Teachers certainly don't need any help. They got this. But if you are connected and there is someone else you can ask for help throughout the course of the day or do a check-in with you, what a different environment now. So now you're not so isolated and you're not alone. So here's what we're going to do. So we're going to model it, and then we're going to go around the room, and we're going to see how we're doing.
Daddy's shaking his head. Don't come to me.
What do we do? You want to? So let's.
All right, so do you have any volunteers in case people?
Are you guys feeling good about it? Do you think we can get around the room with it, or are you just too apprehensive? You want to get around the room? What time is it?
5, if you want to leave some minutes.
Okay,
so
all
we'll
right,
just get a small group.
We'll get a small group.
Okay,
Eddie,
come on, Jonathan.
Jonathan,
We would
Jamal,
like to. How about that?
Jamal,
Mary.
if you would like to.
Evelyn, and Danny, come on up.
All right.
So now it's kind of low energy.
Didn't say you are coming up. You're game? Good. Okay. All right.
Come on.
So we're going to show you how this works.
And this can be done in a classroom with 30 kids in about how long, Dan?
10, 15 minutes.
10. And once you get the hang of it, it goes quickly. I just love it. I drank the Kool-Aid.
Good morning, Karen. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling energized and determined
And what is your goal for this meeting?
to talk to everyone and teach them about the sanctuary model and what we do in schools.
I think you asked help.
I've asked you, so will you help me?
You got it.
Thank you. Eddie, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling excited and motivated and, overjoyed.
And what's your goal?
My goal for today is to actually be present in this conference.
And who are you going to ask for help?
I'm actually going to tap on everyone.
Okay. We got you.
Yeah. Jamal, how are you feeling? I'm excited. What is your goal for today? To take information from the sanctuary model and all the panelists today take information in that to bring back to my business. Okay. And who will you ask for help? You. Dr. Santiago.
All right, we will help you.
Now you'll ask.
Luther, how are you feeling?
Anxious and busy.
What are your goals for today?
Well, we talking about here or we talking about?
Just here.
Oh, just here. To have fun, participate, and get information.
Who you ask for help?
Well, I ask for help. I'm gonna ask Jonathan right behind me.
Okay.
I got you.
Jonathan, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling focused today.
And what is your goal?
My goal is to acquire as much information as possible so I can turnkey it for my staff.
Did you say turnkey?
Yeah. Make sure that I take what I learned and make sure they learn it.
And who are you asking help?
I want to ask Dr. Santiago for help.
I'll be there for you. Don't worry about that.
Eileen, how are you feeling today?
I am feeling excited, inspired, connected to everybody here.
And what is your goal for the session?
My goal for the session and the day is to really advocate for partnership and for whole child education.
And who will you ask for help?
I'm going to ask for everyone's help, but particularly those who are in positions that can make decisions and movers and shakers. And how are you feeling today, Beverly? Very excited today. And what are your goals for our time together?
My goals are really to learn some skills that I can take back and use in my work.
And who could you ask for help? Who will you ask for
I
help?
will ask Karen.
Okay. JoAnne, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling motivated.
What's your goal for today?
To help facilitate this meeting.
And who will you ask for help?
I'm going to ask my co-presenters.
Great.
Danny, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling inspired.
And what is your goal for this session?
For this session is to keep seeing how Andrews can make our linkages and support.
And who will you ask for help?
Thank you.
So there you go. That's our community meeting, and it really takes a pulse of the classroom. If I'm talking about it from the teacher's perspective. And if you know that someone is not doing well, we have something called where we check in. You don't have to necessarily address it. Your goal is to just go around the room, get a pulse, and say, I'll check in with you later, okay? And then if you see it's a red flag, you take the next step. But I leave it to my Andrews experts, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. So, I'm happy to have a seat. What that does is, it really helps a child, if you're doing with the children in your classroom, to connect to who they are, how they're feeling. Also gives them a sense of belonging, and there's someone else that they can connect to And the whole question about what your goal is really about future, right? So you're always encouraging and inspiring. I heard a presenter today talk about treating children as scholars, really giving them something to aim for. So every step of this integrates this opportunity to help them think about how to move forward in a positive way, and that's very important. It's critical. So we have a lot of tools, but the last one I want to share with you is self, which is safety, emotion, loss, and future. And this is a great problem-solving framework, and it's not linear, so you can go out of order. But what happens a lot of times is you're getting emotion, you're having problems, there's something not quite right, and you can't put your handle on it. And it has a lot to do with safety. You talked earlier about all of those domains of feeling safe and about nonviolence or those kinds of things. Children need to feel safe, adults need to feel safe, organizations need to feel safe. When they're not feeling safe, you know something's not quite right about the building. People are tense, people are stressed. So you want to unpack that. So sometimes you're unpacking that feeling of safety. So if I'm not feeling safe, what are some of the reasons, what are some of the things that could be making me feel unsafe? There's a little girl who's been my best friend all month long, and now she's not speaking to me, and I'm really, really upset. This isn't in a child's mind. That child is not feeling safe right now. Or on the way to school, they witnessed something horrible, or they got in trouble, and now they got yelled at right before class started. Or they don't feel like the teacher is paying enough attention, or the teacher's ignoring them. There are a lot of things wrapped in what can make a child feel unsafe. There are a lot of things that are wrapped in what can make an adult feel unsafe. So in a problem-solving framework like self, you want to talk about what's unsafe, how to get safe. You want to talk about emotions. What's the emotion that you're feeling right now? And there's a sense of loss when you feel unsafe. You want to talk about loss, and you want to get to future. What does it look like in the future when this feels better, when this looks better? What are some goals that we can make? What are some agreements that we can have that can get us there? So because it's not linear, you don't necessarily have to start with safety. You could actually start with the future. And for me, it's like that social work miracle question. If you can have a miracle tomorrow and things could look different, what would it look like? And you have that conversation around what it looks like. So what did you give up in the transaction of it looking like this? And so you can talk and process the loss. What are the emotions around what you're giving up, or this new way you have to be, or what was the experience that you just had? And what made you feel unsafe, and now how can we make you feel safe? So it operates in that kind of way. Usually it's really good to start with future, because a lot of times when people are upset, they're operating from a very negative space, and they're not feeling like things can actually get better. So to focus your conversation on ways in which you can actually have a different outcome or have something different happen is important. And it connects people to the opportunity of hope. And hopefully, even if you're not a social worker, and especially if you're an educator, you're in the business of manufacturing hope, opportunity, right? And skills and beauty for children. So I'm hoping that you do that. I'm hoping that you like our sanctuary model. I'm going to turn it right back over to you now, JoAnne, and I thank you.
So we have been, as I said earlier, in 5 schools, and now we are working on collecting some data. So how do teachers feel about their relationships with children? Are they doing anything differently? If we're thinking about reducing suspensions and disproportionalities, it really begins with the teachers, right? It begins at that classroom level. So what are the teachers reporting as a result of having sanctuary training and us being in the schools? So this is just some preliminary data. We haven't collected all the data yet. We're in the process of doing that. The community meetings help me gauge where students are so I can intervene with appropriate strategies. So instead of sending a child to the office, I'm thinking about what I can do as a classroom teacher. What are some of the things I need to address? I'm more aware of trauma, and I don't make assumptions about children and families. I'm looking beyond the behaviors to understand what is happening. Problems can be related to not having breakfast or someone not saying goodbye. My students look forward to community meetings. I gained insights about indicators and warning signs, awareness and understanding related to trauma, ACE factors, so I can look at students differently and interact with them. And then community meetings are driving student goals both academically and socially. And Jonathan, since you've been involved in this project since the very beginning as the principal, do you share a little something?
Sure. Jamal and I share a campus. He's Longfellow Elementary, I'm Longfellow Middle, and while his school has expertly implemented PBIS, we've done the same with Sanctuary Institute. And the reason why that's important is that adults at the middle school level tend not to buy into the idea of incentives and rewards, but they understand the value of saying good morning or good afternoon. And so in our school this year, we had 0 suspensions for insubordination or disrespectful behavior. 0. And a lot of this comes from the fact that we understand that somebody's not taking off their book bag sometimes because they're homeless and don't feel comfortable sitting items down. 2 years ago, that would have led to a confrontation between the adult and the student. We have completely eliminated referrals out of our building. They no longer exist. What teachers and students do now is they complete incident reports. So what they say is this happened, and then we have a conversation about whether what happened is worthy of a referral to a psychologist, a social worker, the guidance counselor, or does it need to go to an administrator for follow-up? And that's been a tremendous culture shift. Keep in mind, this was a school that had 250 out-of-school suspensions 3 years ago. And today, we have 35. Wow. And it's a lot of that gets, from my perspective, a lot of that gets tied into the fact that we're accounting for feelings. And students have learned to say, you know what, I'm angry. And we've learned to say, it's okay to be angry, because guess what, I am too. and I was just telling Jamal that I don't always do it, but virtually every time I sit down with adults, the meeting starts with, how are you feeling? What is your goal for this session? And we tweaked the last question, and it's not who will you ask for help, but who can you? Because what we found is that a lot of people are reluctant to ask for help, and that little tweak has made a difference, because you know what the students realize? I'm there to help them. Because when they said, well, I can't ask anyone for help, I'm like, well, who can you? And they're like, you? I'm like, yeah, I'm here to help you. And they're like, oh, yeah. You know, just getting that little mental shift has made a big difference with the teachers as well. I could talk for the next 3 hours about Sanctuary. The interesting thing I will say, though, is the changes have been so sweeping that some of the teachers don't realize that the changes are attributed to Sanctuary. It's become normal so fast that it's just better, but we don't really realize why it's better, so I have to keep reminding them of it to use that precise language. So I've used things like open communication. This is a social learning opportunity. This is an example of democracy. This is me exercising emotional intelligence, just really reiterating those 7 commitments in our conversations so that even when we disagree in public settings, it's tied to the Sanctuary beliefs.
Let's do a time check.
Yeah, Pat just came by, so we have to. Well, we need some time.
Okay. We have gone from the big lens, the larger lens of whole child education, focusing in on Sanctuary's work with social emotional learning, intelligence, safety, trauma, dealing with stress. We're going to broaden the lens again because I'm really excited about our audience today, where we are crossing boundaries. There are educators here at the classroom level, there are social workers, there are policy people, there are district leaders represented at this venue. So I'm really excited about that. I'm going to take advantage of it. But we're going to go back to our opening for this workshop, which is really thinking about ecosystems, about how all the pieces must fit together to support children. And so I'm going to share with you the possibilities of what could happen. And then we'll do a closing slide. If we are about schools that are about supporting the whole child, then this is just one example of a school. Actually, it was my school, a community school, where we were fortunate enough to have really good partners working together to support all aspects of children's growth. So I'm just going to kind of nest that idea in your minds, which is try to make schools your one-stop hub we all know, and the social workers know more than I would, but from experience I can tell you, when you have children in need and you want to do an outside referral, it is very rare for them to get from point A to point B. If you wrap around the services as Michael showed me early on in my principalship, and try to nest as many services within the building, it's a great, you have great resources that you can offer children. I'm just going to say this. I don't mean tenants in your building. I mean partners. Partners where there's lots of communication, and some of these things that we've talked about, sensitivity, communication, safety zones for having disagreements, crossing boundaries. If you're a principal and you're working with a CEO of a mental health organization. But you can see here, if you could envision a school as a one-stop where you could do therapeutic family support, which is those the collateral services that were mentioned earlier at the beginning of this session, where you have parent and community education, where you offer health services for children, and where you have after-school and summer programming that is not just about test prep, where you have academic interventions, and you have enrichment together. And finally, where professional development is a key part of this. JoAnne and I have come to know each other over many years because we were among the first in this county to form a school community, a university school assisted partnership that has gone and still exists to this day. So we just want to broaden the lens for you to get a sense of thinking about how you can design a school to be comprehensive, to be thoughtfully integrated. Let's move to the last slide. I think we could get them.
Get them all up?
We could get them all up because we're in a little bit of a hurry. For those of you who are in any position to affect policy, to move and shape, or to be an advocate in some way, this is what I think, this is what we collectively think can help change schools so that we don't have disproportionality, so that we don't have children of color allocated to special education or put into or put out of school. First, we need to be able, I'm kind of echoing this to Michael back there, we need to be able to use our resources flexibly. So much of the time, and Michael has actually shared with me, that some of the funding that's coming in is getting harder and harder to use flexibly as opposed to wrapping around the services around children. I'm getting some nods at the head. Mm-hmm. The other thing is in Westchester County, we have a growing population of children who are either second language learners or children who are living in poverty with decreased services. We're always at a disadvantage when we compete with New York City. And we've got to fix that. And so I would urge those of you who are in a position to do that to lend your voice to that cause. We need to cultivate leadership at all levels. Certainly, I think this conference today has shown that whether you are a parent, and actually I do have a former parent here sitting in the back, whether you're a parent or you're working at a college or you're a superintendent or a region or a mental health professional, we really need to cultivate leaderships at all levels, and we need to cross the boundaries of our respective organizations so that we can impact positively children, families, and communities. And then we want to have more trauma-informed schools. We want to be able to create a landscape that addresses not only the academic pieces, but that really addresses children's social, emotional well-being. And we want to be able to do this because we want to provide opportunities for disadvantaged youth and children. So we want to leave those thoughts with you as you go on to enjoy this throughout the day.
5 minutes for Q&A, 6 minutes for Q&A, so ask away.
And so that 6 minutes for Q&A, lucky for you, the lunchroom, you can can get your box right in this hallway, and then you'll proceed to the lunchroom. And if you're with a school community team, there'll be signs up for your school district. We ask that when you get your box lunch, you sit with your school community team. This is a working lunch that we have. I want to thank all of our panelists. I think this was great. But so happy to stay here. Fill out the evaluation and leave it before you leave the room. Thank you.
Any comments or questions before you go? No? Okay.
Absolutely.
Carry the mission forward.